what if a school says to you, Jen, we can't implement the buddy process. We can't parent group your child with specific children. It just doesn't work with our setup. Doesn't mean we're gluing those children to other children, but it's a subtlety that makes sense. It's how to help them find connections. So that goes to school-based accommodations, interventions, especially within a public school. In a private school, it's a little bit of a different matter,
Yeah.
and finding the right school that's willing to do it. What feedback do you have on that?
So this is actually interesting because the buddy process is supposed to be helpful, and not just, I will say, not just helpful for your child with SMs, whether it's your student that you're picking up on this from, or a parent. The buddy process shouldn't limit a child. And I think sometimes what I hear, because you sort of tapped on the idea of, well, what if it just doesn't work for the school and they're not able to keep this child with another child, across settings. And I think sometimes there is a misconception. Maybe this happens a little bit more often too, as we get into elementary and middle and high school, is that, hey, this one child who's my SM client, student, or my personal child, this one buddy is the main buddy and the only buddy. And so therefore they need to be with this one buddy all the time for the next, several years of school. And I always point out that's not the buddy process. The buddy process isn't picking one student for the lifetime of your child's academics, right? From year to year to year. Although we can have a mix of children who just tend to be a good fit for your child, who may rotate across years, but it really shouldn't, like what I usually will tell to schools or parents is that the buddy process should be there to empower your child, to engage them more confidently, and to expand their social communication. Because those three pieces say, if I can have a buddy that I'm comfortable with, and I know and I feel engaged with, and I'm coming into my classroom environment feeling a little more relaxed, I can do more things with this peer with me. That's that empowerment. I can come in to your classroom feeling a little better, or whatever that looks like across the school day. But it should then engage my child. That buddy is not there just to sit next to them. We want to be utilizing that buddy to engage them more so in the classroom. So it shouldn't just be they're off to the side in their own clique and they're not communicating to anyone or participating. Or what we sometimes hear is, sometimes parents will say, I don't know if I want my child paired with this SM child all as much as they have been. And I always say, if we've gotten to that point, we might not have been using the buddy process the way it was intended, because it's intended to build that comfort and then to engage that child more actively in the classroom, and then to expand them to other peers. So we don't want to just lock into one peer. We're looking to sort of grow their group. And that's what you mentioned, several ways to grow the group, not just pairing with one child, but your buddy and maybe one or two other children. And we're sort of, I don't know, you said the word juggling. So now I'm thinking like we're sort of juggling these three peers, throughout their small groups. And maybe we're doing a lunch bunch with those three peers. And the reason that's important is because what if the buddy that, let's say, the teacher picks on behalf of your child, or you pick, is out sick or travels? And then what do you do when that buddy is now no longer in school? We don't want that child to stop engaging and not communicate. So I can see where sometimes teachers feel like, whoa, we can't pair this child all the time with this one child. Maybe that's not the healthiest dynamics. And I would agree that in time, it should do those three things. It should empower, engage, and expand the communication. And the other part too is, if we're using the buddy process correctly, we should have a group of kids by the end of the school year, several that we have now. We might have started the school year with none that we were comfortable with, but because the teacher's maybe observing that your child engages with one or two of these kids pretty comfortably and starts them with that group, that doesn't mean you start them there and leave them there. It's what we do with the strategies. And then as we add a few kids to that grouping, by the end of the school year, we have a handful of kids that, if we're going to make let's say an accommodation request, would be the next school year, we want to pair them with two or three of their comfortable, familiar, or verbal friends. We should at that point have a few to pick from if we're using the buddy process correctly. So I always attempt, when I'm speaking to teachers, acknowledge that, yes, if you're I have a high school client, I cannot have my high school client in every single class with one friend, because they're in two different tracks academically, their classes are changing. However, we are able to take that buddy and pair them up in some pretty important places, like when they go to the cafeteria for lunch, they have the same period, they have a resource time together. And so then we start to look at other classes that we can get some familiarity with, people to grow, not having to have the same exact kids across every single class. That would be a scheduling, challenge for schools. But there's always a way to make it work if we're using the buddy process correctly.
Yes. And I like that you were talking about, multiple children. I tell families all the time, think 3 to 5 kids. Obviously, the younger the child, it might be 2 to 4, or 3 to 4. But 3 to 5 children that you pair with, group with, sit with, do small groups with, and rotate them. And as you said, as they build comfort, we rotate kids and communication progress, rotate kids in and out of those groups, and to the point where, because one of the challenges, again, another podcast, is how do you go from comfort communication in a small group to progression to being able to be verbal and communicative in a large group. And that's a whole process in itself. But I think it's really important that we tell families it's 3 to 5 kids that we pair and group with, trying to find areas of interest that will help connect them, and working closely with the teachers and the parents to be able to facilitate those interactions through the buddy process, the small groups in and out of the room, but the play dates and get-togethers. And I just want to talk about the concept of a train ride. Think of buddies as a train ride. You get on stop 1 and you have 3 buddies, and you move along and you're working on strategies, interventions. A child is working specifically with one child on a play date because it turns out the parents are friends. The child comes over with very excited, very little effort was needed to progress them into speech. The parents had the kids run around outside. The child just spontaneously began to speak. That may be different than someone else where the parents have to facilitate an interaction through areas of interest, through visuals, bringing the child in through choice, maybe using this or that, tell me, there's many different ways and tons of different strategies to use that might help that child make the progress. But that comfort and connection is critical. Child becomes verbal. Parents then go to the playground for the younger child. The child is verbalizing spontaneously. The parents may be playing a game like I Spy, something green, and the child starts to verbalize. The parent goes into the classroom in the spot, playing some games like headbands, child's verbal. That's a perfect verbal intermediary now. So now the teacher has a child that the child has progressed into speech with. And during class, if they're doing a small group or even just that child and a different child, do you want red or blue? No answer, red or blue, tell Rebecca. And then the teacher repeats with that eye contact. I need to tell our listeners that's a really basic strategy. That's not hard to implement, and it's very easy. Does that always work? No. And we have to tweak it. And there's lots and lots of ways. Because Jen, I definitely want to do a podcast on how to kind of finesse this transitional strategy. So many people think verbal intermediary, this or that, tell Rebecca, that's it. It is so many ways to finesse a verbal intermediary and how to use it so the child can become verbal. It's not just having someone you talk to. So I definitely want to do a podcast where we dive in a little bit deeper into some of these transitional strategies, sounds to words and so forth, and how to really kind of use that for families. But I was giving that example because the nice part of that example was that child who went home, transitioned, parent transitioned it into school. Then maybe we have to meet with the teacher and do a fade in with the teacher. So the teacher's there doing an area of interest, and the child progresses into using parent, let's say, as an intermediary. Maybe they're using sounds to words. Maybe they're just comfortable and the teacher asks a choice and the child speaks because there's no one else around. I mean, again, I don't know,